Welcome, Tanya.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in, Tanya. We are running this series called For Purpose podcast, and we are inviting leaders from the for purpose sector and leaders driven by purpose and driving for purpose organization and talking everything around purpose. And we will dive in at multiple layers, the good, bad, and ugly of, the mistanglement or entanglement of purpose and conflicts. Before we go further, I would love you to, share your background briefly and experiences and learnings from a point of view how you have, your purpose has evolved across the decades and the years.
I'm Perth born and fortunate to have wonderful family around me, big part of my life. I have 3 children and a husband, and work in multiple, industry sectors, have lived overseas and worked overseas and had the privilege of studying overseas as well as here. And I think my layers of getting to purpose have been, as anyone, I guess, layered and deepening. And I think that where I find myself now with the work I'm doing with Special Olympics has come about from a sense of gratitude that fuels my purpose, I would say. I think I want to share hope and bright futures for people is where I think that there's a space for so much to be done. And I think the inspiration comes from humanity and connecting with people. And with Special Olympics, it's through the catalyst of sport, which I love and has been a big part of my life. So I think, it finds you, and then you're able to, share, go on the journey. It's a reflection of so many people, and I feel really lucky to be where I am, actually.
Could you talk a bit more on, and before Special Olympics happened to you, what was your life like?
Yeah, so my life's busy, always. I like to be busy.
That's good.
I really enjoy, a full life of family, friends, travel, education. I've always felt driven for more and fueled to do, and very much I feel like you go on the journey and you're programmed almost for a future, and you get you travel or you do things, you get inspired, you meet people, but really you're pretty focused on achieving what's in your mind that you think you will achieve. And I think, you work incredibly hard, and sometimes you come up for air and you go, and you kind of get a sense check, and then you go back down and work again. And I think my life was very much, like that. Children were a big chapter in my life. Being able to have children was not straightforward. And then when you have children, that's not straightforward. And I think that gave me, that part of my life, I'll say, gave me a lot. It put me back into study. When we were trying to have children and it was difficult, it made me return to my want to do further study. And that hadn't happened when I first set out to do it, when I went and lived overseas. And I ended up on a career path through work, and this hurdle and not wanting to keep hitting a wall made me go study, go do what open another door, because you're hitting.
Could you talk a bit more on, what are your role with SOA, but broadly what, you've been involved in?
Yeah, sure. So my study, I did the triple major in accounting, marketing and finance at UWA, and then went into, working in commercial property whilst I was studying. So a wonderful way to learn when you've got a practical application. And I was gifted a love of accounting, which is quite random, but being able to tie something in a bow and have it balance and be able to walk away is something quite rare. Gives you a focus and reward for numbers, I would say. And then I went in on a path I met my husband very young. I met him when I just turned 19. He asked me to dance with him in a bar, and we had a wonderful time traveling, and it took us a long time to get married, and then looked to have children. And when it didn't go to plan, it put me on another tangent, and I went and did more study abroad. Hugh and I were the first married couple in the world to do the program for leadership development at Harvard, which was awesome. Our careers, are intertwined, mine being in commercial property and then working overseas in the UK for property companies, and then coming back and into our family business. So our family business is, multifaceted. It has commercial property portfolio, it has hospitality businesses. So it's fun. It's fun. Good people, amazing relationships that you build with, various facing. It's multi-industry. You deal with sort of every part of community, in some ways. We're customer facing, we're contractors, we're tenants, landlord tenants. There's so many different relationships. So it's really varied and interesting.
Really diverse.
Yeah, really diverse. And
how does all of that experience bring you your, linkage to disabilities?
Yeah.
So how does that happen?
Well, it was through a breakfast that I went to as a guest of a bank, and it was a inspirational women's breakfast for Special Olympics. I didn't really have clarity on what Special Olympics was. It was I feel like it was in my memory, and I've been exposed. But and when they spoke about, someone shared their story, an athlete and their carer, and when they spoke about the transformation that sport provided, I was intrigued and supported the event. And then they asked if I wanted to join their fundraiser lunch committee. And it was in a room with no natural light. And I thought, even if I do it in one of our hospitality venues, that would be a contribution that might, help. And so that was how I got involved, was having the hospitality behind me to be able to support fundraising events. And then we had incredible success with the fundraising, and then that tied me into being accountable back to the people we were raising the funds from, as to how we would demonstrate the impact that their generosity and giving was creating. And so, the event had historically raised between $12,000 and $18,000 a year. The first year we took it to Rambler, which is one of our hospitality venues, we raised $55,000, and then we did $76,000. And then we went 140, 258, and last year we did $450,000.
Powerful.
In a 3-hour lunch, and we do it with no costs.
No costs, yeah.
So the philanthropy and the giving starts way back. And it's that chain of generosity that changes someone's, whatever they can give, converts it, and then allows, to drive impact and purpose.
Very good.
Going forward.
And that comes from the gratitude you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And if you have to distill and talk a bit more on gratitude, how has that, and how has your life experiences told you or taught you and trained you to be more person filled with gratitude?
I think incredibly well brought up. I would say my parents are wonderful people, and my brother and sister, but family. And my dad is a driven entrepreneur, sportsman, very motivated and successful. And my mum is amazing. She is, I would say, a humanitarian, very understated, and I think it's an amazing balance to have. And my mum's idol was Nelson Mandela. She is such a wonderful person with so much purpose, but you're only, as you get older and you see your parents for individuals rather than just being yours, and you find out more about what
they believe
in and they do in their life. And I think that it's deeply ingrained in me without knowing, but that sense of, responsibility to others has definitely been there. But I'd say it's also from happiness, that you have love and happiness, and that fosters gratitude.
And then brings more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very powerful. And coming to, your next role with Special Olympics Australia, could you talk, about the project you're working on and the purpose?
Sure. So Special Olympics, I got involved through the fundraising and then that give back. I then went on this journey I joined the state committee, and then I joined the national board as the only West Australian. So it's quite East Coast centric. So it was lovely to have a presence here and be able to generate opportunities here where there isn't enough. So Special Olympics uses the catalyst of sport to improve the lives of people with intellectual disability, and intellectual disability affecting 3% of the global population indiscriminately. So it can be in any family, and people with intellectual disability are, some of the most marginalised people in the world. So by using such a proven and, it's a global movement. It's the biggest humanitarian event in the world, the World Games. It's the biggest health organisation in the world for people with disability, with over 6 million athletes globally. So the more I got involved, the more I saw it as just a way to drive really positive change in a really hopeful way. And it resonates so well when you talk to people about it. And so there was this video shared with me by a fellow volunteer who sort of who involved us and took us out to soccer games at the start. And she shared this video of Dublin in 2003, which was the first time the World Games were held outside the US. And Nelson Mandela opens the opening ceremony, and there's Bono on the guitar and Arnold Schwarzenegger walking around, and then there's this video of the athletes. And it's amazing. And that was 2003. You go, where have we been? How do we not have this? Why have we not done this? And having Optus Stadium there, it would, it fostered this way, like we should host the World Games. And so we had one of our fundraiser lunches in 2019. We had Dr. Jordan Nguyen come to speak, a biomedical engineer who invented a buggy that you control with your eyes for a boy with cerebral palsy that only had control of his eyes. And that was his dream. And he came across, he donated his fee back to us, which the fee was this hurdle because we were, zero cost. And then it ended up being such a catalyst for other people to give that day. But he said, what are your dreams? And I was like, I want to host the World Games in Perth. And he finished his presentation with that. And I was a bit like, I'm not ready. And he goes, it doesn't happen unless you put it out there. And so it snowballed. He's amazing. He's built an avatar of my dad now. And you put on VR goggles and you can talk to the avatar. Amazing. And, and so then it started, and then it like in earnest, and it started to open up conversations with people around what it might mean or look like and how to go about it. And people made introductions to other people that are in sport and events, and that bid advisory group came into play. And then we secured it for Perth as being, so our board unanimously voted Perth to be the chosen host. And it was a bit like, if the financial risk is ring fenced, then, supportive to explore it. And we had wonderful, pro bono support from like Clayton Utz for law, and the big four, PwC, EY, Deloitte and KPMG all came together. And we said, this is what we're thinking and looking at. EY did our feasibility, then Deloitte did the next bit of work. But really to be collaborative and innovative around a catalyst opportunity to drive systemic change, well, for our nation. And we actually, like our vision, it was to change views, change lives, change our nation, change the world, is what has come to be our,
lunchtime, our mantra
for the World Games. But it's phenomenal what it has then,
grown up to now.
Yeah, and how broad it is. It's on field, 26 sports over 10 days of competition with 8,000 athletes, twice the size of the Paralympics. And then there's the off-field. Off-field is the healthy athlete program, so medical screenings across 8 disciplines, 20,000 medical screenings that brings together allied health and puts that back into community. There's the leadership programs, there's symposia that's shared amongst, minds around the world about changes in legislation and how to improve lives. And so it really brings together so many different facets. And honoured guest, delegations of leaders in the field to share. And so it's remarkable the reach that it has, and it's so much more. It uses the catalyst of sport, but it's to drive inclusion. It's coined an inclusion revolution.
Yeah, and I think we are a sporting nation, and I think that's a good way to get people see. Yeah, and then you can't unsee it, and that normalizes it. So, and what, from a purpose point of view, and from a delivery of that bigger project in WA, you have engaged a lot of sectors to collaborate. And how is the engagement going with the state and the Commonwealth in terms of supporting the project? Yeah,
so the engagement has been broad and deep, and we've had the state government actually created the funding for the EY feasibility to be done. 3 state ministers contributed, and then it was co-funded. EY did our part pro bono. So through Venues West, who have the 13 state government venues, they provided funding, and it demonstrated that Perth has the capability to host. I've met with the mayor, or we in WA have met with over 30 state ministers, government, DGs, all levels, to move it forward. Federally, we had the election. So we had bipartisan support going into the federal election. And then on the other side, we have had a wonderful response from Bill Shorten, who is the Minister for Disability, or NDIS. And then Annika Wells, who's the Sport and Rec Minister. But we have been, to inform the bid, there's so many layers of government involved, DFAT, and federally we're wonderfully supportive. They talk about the green and gold decade that culminates in 2032 with the Olympic Games, and this pipeline of sporting events with the Com Games, the Rugby World Cup, the Netball World Cup, Paralympics and Olympics, to invigorate the nation, because we are sport-loving, healthy, wealthy, peaceful. It really drives participation and activity. So using it as a catalyst. So Special Olympics fits so well in that decade, because it then gives this same opportunity that almost is being offered to everyone else, to the most humble and marginalised.
Very powerful. And can you talk a bit more on the mantra, and then how do you see what happens post the
legacy?
Yeah.
So it's through the catalyst of sport. Together, we will change views, change lives, change our nation, change the world, across the 4 strategic pillars of health. And we have Telethon Kids Institute and the universities, UWA, very active already under a research framework to deliver legacy goals. we then have education, employment and justice are the other three pillars. But we are guided by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, of which Special Olympics performs against 9 of the 17. And under that research framework, we have defined what it would mean to stand on the global stage in 2027 and say we are the most inclusive and accessible nation in the world. And what is the data that reflects that? And then how do we operationalise that through short-term and long-term goals performing against the SDGs so that it is robust and it has data from a research and methodology, kind of consultancy background approach. But it actually, people with intellectual disability haven't even been identified in data capture. So how do we go back and create the data so you can show, say, in health, an improvement in life
outcomes?
Yeah, well, and length of longevity in life.
And will you be, what do you call it, publishing on a recurring basis against these outcomes and goals?
Yes.
That's part of the
so that's
commitment.
the idea is to really drive social impact metrics to become hardened and that evolution of environmental metrics, which used to be warm and fluffy and now they're hardened. It's the same thing with social impact. How do you start to create a currency around it that people know that it feels good, and if you're close to it or you have lived experience, you understand the ripple. But when you're making funding decisions or commitments, what is required to allow those social impact measures to be met, to be quantified so that they do show the return on investment that they really are delivering.
For sure. And I think that's the power of having strong metrics and publishing them, and it's in the face. And then you can see the incremental change. You can start wherever, you don't need to be perfect on the day one.
No.
Wherever you start, and then the commitment to publish the numbers on a recurring basis, the incremental difference you can see or unsee the decremental difference also both ways. It's just very powerful to have these metrics in front of you. And talking about that changing lives and then changing vision and normalizing, how has the for-profit sector reacted to this? You have engaged large accounting organizations, a big four, but how is the overall for-profit sectors, you may call it mining, engineering, consulting, so how they have reacted and what kind of engagement you are receiving?
They've been brilliant. They've been really responsive. They see so much alignment to their ESG strategies and investment strategies, which this performs against. So we had a call to Special Olympics International, Mary Davis, who was the CEO of Ireland, but became the global CEO. And she said, you need to think about what it means to be Australian and to stand on a global stage, what makes you proud. And it really made us see that we have to be unified and have our own backyard, right? So the together in the bit is that we are reconciled as a nation and that we have inclusion front of mind. And so as you look into our very multicultural, landscape, how do we foster the opportunities for everyone? Because where there's marginalisation, you then put ID on top of that. And the stats are magnified and they're the most vulnerable. So it's so that has resonated with our for-profit sector because it's on their agendas. Diversity and inclusion is very, very high, but it's hard to operationalize. And the knowledge that sport is a way to get people engaged and it gets them, it's a version of education. You get to be exposed to mentors or teachers, and then you break into those pillars of better health, better education, better employment, better justice outcomes. So it's how do you get people to the table, especially who uses the catalyst of sport, and it's inclusion. It doesn't compete with other opportunities. It's just offering more where there is not enough.
And as you would have engaged with multiple people across the sector, and one thing, because it covers disabilities, the whole spectrum, and a part of the disabilities spectrum.
Yeah, so intellectual disability.
Yeah. So what kind of feedback you have received from your fellow colleagues from the sector in terms of the inclusiveness of the whole spectrum versus, a part of the spectrum?
Like it's challenging. It's really challenging, and there's an immense amount of fatigue and frustration, I would say. And so this is inspiring and gives hope, because it is a catalyst that brings a lens to it that, it's kind of got a shiny element to it because it is
big.
So ESPN, the global media partner, had in Abu Dhabi in 2019, it had 69 billion media impressions, reached 760 million households through television rights. So people can see that their investment and the opportunity it creates will have, they can translate that to an impact. And so there's a wonderful, pathway to come together around it and make it more, but it does resonate, but it's hard. I would say it's hard. And people go, yay, but and how do we get involved in what? And even that part is difficult, challenging.
Yeah. And because you are engaging with multiple stakeholders and everybody has their own agenda and own purpose and the individual purpose versus organizational purpose, and the alignment of one single goal of what you are trying to achieve with Special Olympics and this event specifically. And there would be for sure places of conflict you would feel and you would face. I don't know whether you have or you haven't. It's just good if you haven't. But if you have, could you share any instances?
Yeah. I wouldn't say places of conflict. I think that because it is about, like, it's rooted in humanity and how sport breaks barriers, because you play sport together, you get off, and then you're connected as humans. And people generally, once they're aware of what the opportunity is, there's a bit of an education process. And, Tim Shriver, the global chair, flipped it in a video he did for us and said, if you don't, and he actually, said, what Special Olympics is, you have athletes, they compete globally. And it really is that if you don't know, you should know, or you better go find out, which is empowering.
Yeah.
But I think it doesn't create conflict, because it is, even though it's serving, the most marginalised and humble, it's that rising tide. If you do that, you capture everyone. So
rising tide lifts everybody, every ship.
Yeah, and no one's left behind. Yeah. So, others, if you do it at another level, intellectual disability without self-advocacy or opportunities created can be left out. And so, and also that it is in every community, in any, crosses all boundaries, that it sits with everyone. So it's not divisive ever. It's always about bringing people together. And the athletes and people with, are amazing.
Powerful.
They're so amazing.
And from a point of view of, as in, before we conclude, I wouldn't want you to, tell me who has impacted your life to come, or anybody who's impacted your life, any book or a story or a thought or a quote which has impacted you to, be what you are.
So many things. Wow. It's hard to pin, but that's more recently.
More recently, yes.
Recently I read The Velveteen Rabbit and cried my eyes out reading it to my kids. That was something that, hit me. And then there's this podcast of how we think about charity is dead wrong. It was Dan Pollitt, a Harvard lecturer, that really flipped that for-profit and not-for-profit and how we think about it, and how we should be applying the same investment to purpose as we do to profit. And that global space is evolving, which is really exciting time to be in it, a part of it. There also I'm trying to think what the book is called, and it's about we're no longer, it's probably called Welfare State, that we're no longer welfare, we're about building capability. So the shift has changed from like post-war needing rations for food to everyone having mobile phones and devices. But how do you invest in capability so people can live well? Are things that have, I think shaped my work into this space, recommended to me by amazing people that are still, or that are big parts of the journey. But there's so many, things that
I think it all boils down to what you talked about earlier in terms of your, being happy and filled with gratitude. Very powerful. Thanks for sharing your views and insights.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.